What is this life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. This line from Leisure by W.H. Davies has resonated with me for as long as I can remember. But over time, it sort of took on a very unsettling nature in my mind because those two words, no time, sort of became the most frequently used phrase by me. And honestly, it wasn't just me, it was also the people around me. And I sort of realized that somehow as a race, collectively we've all gotten busier. Life sort of began to feel like a rush from Monday to Sunday and again. So I started thinking, what are we really rushing towards? And more importantly, what are we leaving behind? I was born in Hyderabad. I grew up here. Of course, it was a very different city back then. Jubilee Hills was a place where we went to watch a sunrise. Better? Right. I was saying that Hyderabad was a very different city back then, the one I grew up in. I was just recounting that Jubilee Hills was a place where we used to really drive to watch a sunset. And beyond that were really just hills, boulders and probably a lot of lakes. My Sundays were usually filled with Jungle Book, Mowgli and a lot of books, Ruskin Bond, Kenneth Anderson, Jim Corbett and the likes. All this was fueled by a master storyteller at home, my grandfather, who used to enthrall me with stories from his childhood. The first time I moved out of town was for my undergrad, and luckily for me, our campus was really a forest with a few buildings strewn around. It was also a vehicle-free environment. We were only allowed to use cycles or walk. And as you can see, there were deer and black buck all through the campus. So that connection with nature sort of grew stronger over time. My professional life took me to Bangalore, Delhi, Calcutta and eventually Bombay. And in that process of professional growth, life, as I said, got faster. I never realized that that connection was waning. In fact, in 2009, I started the first algorithmic trading company in the country. And by 14-15, we were one of the largest as well. So life in that sense was going really well until one day I found out that my father was diagnosed as terminally ill. And just like that, my wife and I sort of decided to move back to Hyderabad. And we returned to a very different place. For the first time in a very long time, I had time on my hands. And when you have time, you tend to stand and stare. You start to notice things. I sort of noticed how my son was extremely excited to interact with his grandparents. My parents, especially my dad, in spite of being ill, had a spring in his step every time he spoke to his grandchildren as well. On the flip side, however, I also started to see and notice how the city had become very different. The air was a lot heavier. It just took a lot longer to go to any place. There was always a constant noise in the background. And as I thought more about it, this was true of all the cities I was living in, I had lived in. The same problems across different cities: traffic, noise, pollution, lack of access to healthy food, disappearing water bodies, and the big one, flooding in the monsoon and water scarcity 6 months later in the summers. I started to think, when a city that gets 700 mm of rainfall faces the same water scarcity problem as the city that gets 4 times as much, the problem of water scarcity itself has very little to do with the rainfall. And that's the irony of it. Something had gone fundamentally wrong in the way we planned our lives and our lifestyles around it. Indulge me in this thought experiment. Just imagine a complex of 1,000 apartments, very common in Hyderabad. Each apartment may be a family of 4. 150 liters per day per person is a standard consumption in a city in India. Simple math would tell you you need about 219 million liters of water to cater to this apartment complex alone. And this city gets about 700 mm of rainfall annually. What you need is 219 million liters. What you have is 700 mm of rainfall. That's the balance we are trying to achieve. A simple back calculation again will tell you that you need about 70 acres to support this apartment complex for its water survival. Now let me repeat that. If every drop of rain that falls in these 70 acres was captured and delivered straight to this apartment complex, only then and only then would this apartment actually make it through the end of the year water-wise. Does that sound very familiar? 1,000 apartments, 70 acres of water footprint. To me it does. Because I remember when I was 10, our water came from a reservoir near Gandipet, which was 17 kilometers from where I live. By the time I got to 15, we started drinking from the Manjira, which is 70 kilometers away. By the time I was 25, I managed to go 120 kilometers away to drink water now. And now I believe we are drawing from the Godavari, which is more than 200 kilometers away. And I begin to think, what next? Because that's the big question, what next? This model of a city, with its increasing need of resources and the ever-expanding circle of demands, is going to run out of, it's been stretched too far. And let's call it what it is really. When the basic needs of life, food, water and power have become a struggle, I think this idea of a bustling metropolis has failed. And that's what it is. So what next? That's the question I was dabbling with. And I thought to myself, if I had the power to reimagine all this with the power of hindsight, how would I start over? How would I plan this community of 1,000 families and make it sustainable in the process? And really speaking, what exactly is sustainability? What defines sustainable? Because that's a word that's being thrown around quite liberally without any sense of definition. Now imagine every drop of water in this case, had it been currency in a common bank account, every time the rain falls, drops get deposited in this account. Every time you consume, drops are withdrawn. If you start withdrawing more than what is being deposited in this account, it's only a matter of time before this bank account runs dry. But imagine the converse. If you deposit more than you withdraw, then this bank account would swell up in no time. True abundance. And that's what I define sustainability as to myself. A lifestyle that replenishes the commons, a system that gives back more than it takes. That was the starting point of BeForest back in 2018 when we started, to create a community that was centered around earth care, people care and fair share. Could we create a community that actually works consistently and continuously to replenish this common bank account? And honestly speaking, there were people already doing it, in silos though. There were those in the city who had actually gone completely water sufficient, they didn't depend on the municipality anymore. There were those who were growing their own food in their houses. There were also those who were fully off-grid, and all this was happening within the same city. And I started to think, what if we bring all of this together into one consistent system, and can we scale it up? Hyderabad Collective, a project we started in 2020, was our boldest step in this direction. It started off with a simple Facebook status explaining this whole concept of sustainability and a last call to action saying, come grow a forest with us. The response we got was so overwhelming that it was very clear a lot of people were concerned about it. The circle of concern was really large. But they did not know what to do about it, and those who didn't really know how to make time for it. And life came in the way somehow. So we took on this onus of actually making it happen for all those guys who were falling in this circle of concern. A complete community that was food, water and power secure. The place we identified was receiving about 600 mm of rainfall that made it the driest mandal in the state. And it was mostly boulders, as you can see. Barely about 50% of the land had soil on it, and that's what we were working with. And the most challenging bit then was the cumulative experience of Team BeForest was zero, and together between all of us we had never built a home. That seemed like a challenge at first, but soon we were brimming with optimism because we felt we were unblemished by convention, and an unblemished mind actually just doesn't think outside the box. It actually does not even see a box. So instead of trying to go around and trying to create homes, where would the solar power sit, what would happen, where would the people drive in, how big are the roads, instead of those conventional way of planning these things, we realized that obviously water is the problem here. So our strategy was really simple. It was just 3 words long: first plant water. That was the start of it. So we built over time about 54 check dams in this landscape, countless number of swales, and a large reservoir to cater to our water budgets. Within 2 years, this reservoir was holding about 30 million liters of water, enough to allow us to move on to the next step, which is actually revitalizing the nature there. We started planting about 30 to 40,000 saplings every year, and something remarkable happened in that process. As we planted more leaves fell to the ground, the soil got richer in carbon, it got richer in biodiversity, and richer soil started capturing more water as well. And soon, as you can see, the green cover started to change dramatically. The vegetation itself, the health of the plants that were there was dramatically different over the time. And the land temperatures, just the sheer experience of human existence itself, the land temperatures dropped. And this all happened in a span of 4 to 5 years. That sort of gave us hope. What was perceived as a challenge back then now became a possibility. And this possibility was seen by our neighbors who started working with us, authorities who supported us in the process, and more importantly, experts who knew how to do these things better across the world. In the process, as the land moved through the hierarchy of needs, new jobs were created, new skills were added to the landscape, and opportunities for micro enterprise, and eventually the revenue stream started emerging. In this process, my understanding of sustainability also got evolved from the simple deposit withdrawal formula to this understanding that any land to be truly sustainable needs to deliver on at least 4 returns. The first one, we called it return of inspiration, a sense of hope and purpose around the larger landscape. Social returns, which is essentially creation of jobs, connections, networks that develop in the process. A natural return, the landscape getting better, healthier, biodiversity, and that common bank account that we spoke about. And eventually the financial returns, creation of consistent long-term revenues in the landscape itself. We call this the 4 returns framework, and this has fueled us to expand beyond that one project to 6 different collectives now across 4 different states. And we have actually set ourselves a very ambitious goal of making 10,000 acres of regenerated landscapes in the next decade. We think that these different collectives can be sites of inspiration that sort of catalyze and inspire people to trigger an ecological transformation across the board. To me, as I look back, BeForest is much more than a company. I think of it as a mission. It's a call for everyone to slow down, to notice things, to get connected to the landscape and experience those simpler pleasures in life. It's a call to start acting intentional in life, create those communities that are driven by purpose and intent. I leave you with these words again. What is this life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. And I ask you, what if we had the time? What if we made the time to actually stand, stare, and notice these things, to create those responsible choices and create a future together? Because the future we want won't just happen by itself. It's not going to land up in the lab. It's going to be created one responsible choice at a time and one community at a time. Thank you.